Welcome back, everybody, to On Pit Road. Steve Ronkwitz, Charlie Turner with you live from the original Gino's Pizza and Grill, and very happy to have Ricky Craven on our phone line. Glad that he could hang out over the break, and lots more to talk about. You've had some great sponsors. Charlie and I talk a lot about iconic times in sport, and especially in racing, you know, cars that you kind of equate with guys and things, and a couple of them, you know, you've had DuPont as a sponsor, of course. You know, a lot of people, you know, there's another guy, some guy named Gordon or something who's done pretty well with it. Budweiser, Kodiak, Tide, all those are sponsors that you've been associated with in your career, and not necessarily are those the sponsors, you know, that people don't necessarily relate those to you, I guess, is kind of the point I'm making. My question is, you had all those sponsors, and yet it seems so difficult now for guys to get sponsorship, and yet you had sponsors that were, you know, really big names in a different time in the sport. And I guess that's what it is. Sport has changed so much that, you know, you see poor guys that are now have, you know, on the side of their car, it's going back to Joe's Hat Shack is on the side of cars. And yet, you know, this has changed so much. Why is it that NASCAR has not been able to hang on to some of the sponsorships? And we talked about this last week with specifically Jack Roush, I guess, is that they've had some great high-name sponsors, but they haven't been able to hang on to them. What's your feeling on it?
Yeah, I truly believe that the majority of the issue, the overwhelming majority of the issue, is just economics. That if you listen and if you read and if you watch interviews with CEOs and executives of the big companies, they're all cutting expenses. They're all trying to cut their expenses because their top line isn't necessarily growing. You know, we're not in a robust economy, so they have no choice but to limit their expenses. And at the end of the day, I think that this is a cycle that we're going to come through. I think the teams are going to learn and be healthier because of it. But it's probably as difficult a time as I've ever seen in my 46 years. And I knew early on when I was trying to climb the ladder to get to the Sprint Cup Series, you had to be more than just a race car driver. You have to be a representative. You have to be a spokesperson. And if you're not performing that well on the racetrack for whatever reason, because you don't have the experience, because you know you're not in a perfect situation yet, you haven't gotten the team where you want it to be, you better offset that with a lot of hard work off the racetrack. And that's the one thing I would share with young competitors today is that, yeah, I can line up 100 really talented race car drivers. But of those 100, how many of them are willing to work every day at some aspect or some dimension of this sport? And it's not all about speed. It's not all about driving. And I think that's what separates those 100 and whittles them down to about 5 or 10. It's hard. You get a good sponsor, you better stand on your head to keep them.
We're talking with Ricky Craven. A couple of things about your career that kind of stand out. One, of course, it's all over YouTube, the 1996 wreck that you had at Talladega, one of the most amazing wrecks ever. And as I was doing some studying for this, I saw that you went to the Hall of Fame with it was your son, I think, and was going through there, and you showed him the car and said, "Hey, see if you recognize this." And he went up and saw the name on the top of the roof. He said, "Is that your car?" That's pretty crazy.
That's exactly right. It is. It was an afternoon at Talladega. Happy hour used to be a little earlier, and I had my family with me, and so I said, "Let's go to the museum. It's close by." We took the golf cart over, and when we went in, that's what you just described is what happened. And to complete the story, or to sort of put a bow on it, my son was at that race, but he was in my wife was 6 months pregnant, so he wasn't really associated with any of that and didn't understand it.
Wow.
And I don't know why we didn't talk much about it. There's certainly, it's well documented. It was ugly, but for whatever reason, he just really wasn't aware of it. And so when he saw that, he said, "Dad, how did you survive that?" And I said, I really can't explain that.
Wow.
I can't explain it. I really appreciate the safety that NASCAR's dedicated themselves to with the cars and the tracks and all that. But I never took that for granted, and I always assumed the risk that is associated with the business. I just love racing. It's a passion I've had my whole life.
There's you talk about the fact that, NASCAR has always had this safety initiative, and I think it's kind of a misnomer that people say, well, after Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s death, there was all this technology that came in, and the Hans device became commonplace. We went with the safer barriers, and that was the turning point. I think it kind of pushed that way. But if I get from what you said, and I believe this as well, that for the technology that was available, whether it was the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, I think NASCAR has always done a pretty darn good job of trying to figure out as much as they possibly could with the resources at hand to keep those cars as safe as they possibly could.
There's no question that they have. There's absolutely no question about that. Not at least from my viewpoint, there isn't any question about it. You have to understand, I have a little different angle on things because I did drive for 25 years, and I understand how drivers think. And as an example of this discussion, I go back to the Daytona 500 that we lost Dale Sr. I was in that race. It was my first race for Cal Wells and the Tide team. Leading up to that Daytona 500 during the off season, Cal Wells had urged me, and he didn't insist, but he highly recommended that I adapt to this Hans device. He said, this is going to become commonplace.
Wow.
And I resisted it because it was uncomfortable. And if a driver's uncomfortable, then a driver slows down.
Mm-hmm.
If a driver's uncomfortable, then a driver's distracted. And those things are, at the end of the day, the driver says, I'm not willing to do it because all I care about is winning. And losing Dale Earnhardt certainly had a profound effect on everyone, including us drivers, because I remember my first feeling when I was told before we left that Dale had lost his life. I honestly thought to myself, if Dale can die in a race car, the rest of us don't stand a chance.
Wow, yeah.
That's the first thing I thought of. So then, I don't think I ever ran a race after that without the Hans device. So anyway, it is an evolution. We're constantly making progress, and sometimes you can argue it's not fast enough, and sometimes you can argue that you overreact. I just don't think anybody's really qualified to judge that.
Well, I went backwards in this interview to talk about Ricky Craven, so we ran out of time to talk about stuff that's going on. Tune into NASCAR Now, and everybody will get all that information from you there. So lots of great stuff going on. Interesting. I'll give you a minute to talk about Kurt Busch moving to Furniture Row Motorsports. Interesting that your win at Darlington was over Kurt Busch. Now Kurt Busch moving, one of the big stories. And I'll give you a whole minute and a half to talk about it.
I appreciate that. Kurt, I like Kurt. He's been very entertaining to watch. He's been very entertaining to listen to. But to be clear, this guy can drive the wheels off of a race car. He and his brother both. So they're a great addition to the sport. I think that he's in an interesting position that I can relate to a little bit. After losing my ride at Hendrick Motorsports, it took me a few years to rebound, and then eventually get the opportunity with Tide, and I feel like I capitalized on it. Kurt's sort of in that situation where he's definitely in that situation where he's having to rebuild his career, and he's, I think, got that opportunity now. This is a team that's run competitively, and they've run for several years, and I think they have the tools and the goods to make runs for victories and get to victory lane. So I fully expect Kurt's going to capitalize on this. I think as you get older, you get wiser. Experience is invaluable. So I think it's all good for Kurt.
Ricky Craven, as I said, we haven't tipped the iceberg here. I'd like to talk to you again. Maybe we can give you a call in a couple of weeks and continue on. But thanks so much. We appreciate the time tonight. And congratulations. Keep doing some great work at ESPN. Loving listening to you.
I really enjoy what I'm doing with ESPN. It's a great company. I'm having a lot of fun. And I also enjoy listening to both of you. You do a great job, and I look forward to the next conversation.
All right, thanks so much. That's Ricky Craven. We're going to take a break. This is the fastest 2 hours on Ustream on Pit Row. Well, we're not exactly going to take a break. We got a couple of minutes here after we got done with Ricky. We did tape Ricky beforehand, so obviously you know that.
Terrific interview, really good job, and
what an interesting
stuff. I mean, you could talk. You said to me before the show tonight that you could have talked to him for another hour, and I can hear that in the interview because I have talked to you. I know you weren't done.
Yeah, we had a lot to go. It's funny because when we do these things, you put a list of notes together, questions together, and usually
sometimes you run out of interview before you run out of time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I had gotten through about half the page of stuff that I wanted to talk with Ricky about. Nothing, really other than Kurt of current stuff. Right. But Ricky Craven's one of those guys that, and we touched on it a little bit. He came from Maine, along with Tim Richmond and Steve Park and a couple of these other guys from the Northeast. And when he did that, that was unprecedented to get these guys to come down there and get good quality rides, which he was able to do, and make an impact on the sport. So, it's really pretty cool to see how.
Well, the Bodines came from up that way, too.
Right, exactly. The Bodines as well,
yep.
As well. But lots more to talk with Ricky about. We'll get him on in a couple more weeks and finish up with some of that as well. And
there'll probably be a couple more storylines to touch on in 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks too. We might have a little bit more going on with 5 weeks into the chase than we have 2 weeks into it. So
and
good stuff though.
A lot of people who comment on the TV broadcasts will say, and I'm not just saying this